Israel has carried out new strikes against Lebanon despite a US-led call for a temporary ceasefire. A joint statement urging a 21-day truce was issued by the US, France, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and other countries following talks on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in New York, where he's due to address this gathering of world leaders on Friday. He says the strikes on Lebanon will not stop until Hezbollah stops its cross-border fire, which has forced tens of thousands to evacuate their homes in northern Israel.
The Israeli army has carried out more than 2,000 strikes in Lebanon since the start of the week. But it appears no closer to stopping Hezbollah firing rockets over the border and allowing northern Israel residents to return to towns like this one, that have been almost emptied by near-daily attacks. Now, with tanks heading to the border, it seems Israel is preparing to send in ground forces to try and achieve what air power hasn't.
You will go in and destroy the enemy there. This is what will allow us to safely return the residents of the north afterwards.
Israeli officials have made clear that their aim is to force Hezbollah back across Lebanon's Litani River, creating the buffer zone that the UN Security Council called for back in 2006 at the end of the last war between Israel and the group. The area is a stronghold of Hezbollah. While the group has been weakened by Israel's killings of senior commanders, it is still thought to have between 40 and 50,000 fighters, as well as an arsenal of 150,000 rockets. Hezbollah is also believed to have built an extensive tunnel network, as seen in its propaganda videos like this one. According to Israeli estimates, it could cover hundreds of kilometers. Experts say Hezbollah will likely prove even more of a challenge than Hamas.
Hezbollah forces are far more battle-hardened. They are much more sophisticated in terms of how they operate, more independently, because they operate also like Hamas in a way. But obviously Hamas has never been in this high-intensity combat before. Most of the Hamas forces, Hezbollah has. While the IDF has obviously prepared for years for this war, they do know how costly it's going to be.
But the Lebanese people will also be forced to pay the price of any ground invasion. Last week's attacks have already killed hundreds, while tens of thousands more have fled from their homes in southern Lebanon in search of safety. Those who have made it to shelter, like here in Beirut, have little faith in the prospect of a ceasefire.
Clearly, Israel is lying. For a whole year, they have been talking about a truce in Gaza. But it has not happened.
A truce isn't enough for us to return to our homes because it lasts for a short time, then we'll be displaced again. We want to return to our homes permanently.
With Israeli forces conducting exercises close to the Lebanese border on Thursday, those who have left their homes behind can only wait and hope.
Heiko Wimmen is the International Crisis Group's project director for Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. Welcome to DW. We've seen Israel and Hezbollah trading rhetoric and rocket fire across this week, with thousands on the ground in Lebanon running for their lives. What part does the Lebanese government play in all of this?
The Lebanese government plays very little part in it, because the Lebanese government has no leverage in any shape or form over Hezbollah, and they mediate. They are a conduit between Hezbollah and international mediators within the United States, because the United States would not talk to terrorists such as Hezbollah. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Lebanese Minister of Foreign Affairs, actually has put that nicely for us in a conversation we had 2-3 months ago. He would just say, well, we negotiate, Hezbollah calls the shots. And obviously that can be taken quite literally.
Right. So when we see this call for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah that was issued by the US and others, the wording was interesting. It called on all parties, including the governments of Israel and Lebanon, to endorse the temporary ceasefire immediately and didn't mention Hezbollah. And this then is because, as you say, they don't speak directly to terrorists.
I suppose so. I mean, it's the UN in the end, or the UN as a forum, and the French were also sponsors of this declaration or this statement. So, and the French do speak to Hezbollah. So, I mean, I don't really see why they would not put them in, except maybe they don't want to have a non-state actor in this. But anyway, it's moot. The Israelis have rejected it. Netanyahu has rejected it. So it's not flying. It's not going to go anywhere, it would appear, for now at least.
OK. So talk to us more then about the position of Hezbollah within Lebanese military and political structures, because it does sound very much like a state within a state.
Well, it surely is, and some people also describe it as a state within a failed state, right? Because Lebanon was never a very strong state, or had never had a very strong state, and since 2019, the economic crisis, that's already feeble state has been eroded even more so. So Hezbollah is a political party. Hezbollah is represented in parliament. They have allies in parliament, in the political sphere, all of which allows them to either impose their will or veto whatever others want to do if it's not to their liking. And of course, that becomes especially important when it comes to imposing limitations on Hezbollah's ability to wage war by its own decision without asking the government or the competent institutions in any shape or form. Now, Hezbollah has a very big arsenal of rockets, of course, at least from all we know about the intelligence and reports. They also have 20,000, 30,000 fighters. Nobody knows, of course, again, how many. So the Lebanese state does not have any coercive means. So they cannot tell Hezbollah anything, what to do, what not to do, and they cannot force anything upon them. Hezbollah is a decision upon itself, and they have made very clear in the past that these decisions cannot be challenged on the Lebanese level by nobody.
And Lebanon, though, does have an army, but from what you've said, it sounds like the idea of trying to impose a decision on Hezbollah by the Lebanese government is unthinkable.
Yeah, no, it's inconceivable. And we have seen that in the past, various confrontations that occurred, specifically one in 2008. There was one where a Lebanese government actually tried to impose something on Hezbollah. It was a rather timid attempt. And then when Hezbollah decided to take the gloves off and respond with violence to that timid attempt, that government had no means to do anything about it. The army stood by, the security forces stood by. It's generally expected that if you were to send the army or any other security force against Hezbollah, that then the army would split. And you would basically immediately descend into a full-fledged civil war. And nobody has tried that. Nobody is likely to try that. And it's certainly not going to, it won't do any good. That's for sure.
And is Hezbollah popular? It's a political and social entity as well. Do people back it?
So Lebanon is a very much divided society, and the divisions are mostly sectarian. They're also political, so they're sometimes cut across the sectarian divides. And there's a very significant part of the Lebanese who are opposed, strongly opposed, to what Hezbollah is doing. But even in elections, even through the formal democratic process, they were never able to assemble a majority big enough to really do something about Hezbollah. Leave alone the question then if they would try to do that, what then the response, the militant and violent response would look like. Hezbollah has supporters, mostly, I mean, the movement is, of course, based in the Shiite community. They have pretty much achieved a monopoly in the representation of that community. They are ideologically very dominant within it, and there is dissent. There surely is dissent. And now, perhaps more than ever before, because people are suffering, and not everybody is necessarily subscribed to the discourse, describes to the war objective. Not everybody thinks that this suffering is really worth it. But the party is built in a way, and it's rooted in its community in a way that such dissent cannot come to the fore. People who have these misgivings either shut up or leave. It's inconceivable that you could have a popular movement that basically withdraws trust and support from the leadership within the Shia community.
And you talked about Hezbollah as a state within a failed state. I just want to go back to that, because the country's, Lebanon's political and social fragility very much brought into focus in August of 2020 with that massive explosion in the port of Beirut that severed the country's main import artery. It was suffering then. How much had it recovered before all this happened?
There is no real recovery because the political leadership of this country and also the economic players, and those are overlapping to a large extent. To some extent, they're the same. These leaders have, since 2019, since even a year before that explosion, have consistently resisted any substantial reforms, anything, all what has been proposed. The IMF stands ready to help Lebanon. Give $3 billion, and then others would come in. In 2019, there were pledges up to $13 billion from countries who would support Lebanon. But there's conditionality. Countries do not want to see this money go down the drain, fund the corruption and mismanagement that has produced the crisis in the first place. So that would require substantial reform within the Lebanese political system, governance and all of that. And the parties involved have no interest in that. It would destroy their political model, really. Right. The political model is built on nepotism, on clientelism. If you have a choice between political suicide by accepting these reforms and continued bankruptcy of the country while you are able to preserve your position, then you choose the second.
Thank you so much for guiding us through that, Heiko. Heiko Wimmen from the International Crisis Group. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's bring in journalist Karim El-Gawhary in Beirut. Welcome back, Karim. Let's start, if we can, with Hezbollah's view of this proposed temporary ceasefire.
Well, until now, there is no official answer from Hezbollah to this proposal. But as it was already rejected from the Israeli side, I think the whole thing right now is off the table. But I think it's safe to say that Hezbollah would have probably also rejected it, because Hezbollah is, of course, legitimizing its attacks on North Israel with saying that we want to build up pressure so the Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip is going to end. So if they would now agree to an end of the war here in Lebanon while the war in Gaza still continues, that would be some kind of capitulation in the view of Hezbollah. Now, in this proposal, there is, of course, the idea of 21 days of a ceasefire. In that time, there should be work on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. But I think that's too vague for Hezbollah. They have a clear link. They say an end of the war in Lebanon can only happen if there's an end of the war in the Gaza Strip.
Right. So last night we heard from the Israel Defense Forces, the Chief of General Staff, telling troops to prepare for a possible ground invasion into Lebanon. What is happening on the military front in the south at the moment?
Well, today, again, relentless bombing in the south, especially in the southern part of the country. We have also an airstrike against another Hezbollah commander in Beirut, the one who was responsible for the drone unit. It means, a very important person. So the question everyone is asking here, what is happening now with the Israeli ground assault, with an Israeli offensive into Lebanon? Of course, not only Israel is preparing for this since many, many years. Also, Hezbollah is preparing, at least since 2006, since the end of the last confrontation between both sides, for another possible Israeli assault into Lebanon. The big question is really about knowledge here at this moment, because we see that Israel infiltrated Hezbollah. We can see this because they know the locations of various Hezbollah commanders, the last one today. The question is, how much do they know about the preparation of Hezbollah in case the Israeli army comes in? That might be really decisive for how this Israeli ground assault is going to go, if it happens at all.
And if it happened, the Israeli goal would be to achieve what?
Yeah, that's exactly the big question. Because, if the idea is, as last time, 2006, to destroy Hezbollah, I think that's a very unrealistic goal. We can see last time this happened, Hezbollah stood their ground in the south, and then at the end, since that, they're sitting in every government in Beirut. They're militarily stronger than they've ever been before. So the question is, but the other goal is, of course, to make it possible for the citizens of Israel to go back to their houses in North Israel. But to spoil that would be pretty easy on Hezbollah's side. They just have to, once in a while, shoot missiles from Lebanon into the Gaza Strip. And as missiles also taking a longer range, it would be very difficult for the Israeli troops to occupy a territory that is big enough that there won't be any more missile strikes on the northern part of Israel.
Thank you so much for talking us through that, as ever. Karim El-Gawhary in Beirut.
You're welcome.
Well, Jennifer Moorehead is Save the Children's country director for Lebanon. She joins us from Beirut. Welcome to DW. Thanks for joining us at what must be a very busy time for you. What can you tell us about what's happening there now?
Well, we have a situation of extreme instability and very, very scary for kids and their families here. We have a continuation of the airstrikes that really escalated on Monday and resulted in the dramatic images of hundreds of thousands of people taking to the roads to escape the south. And now so many families are trying to get into the shelters that have been set up to house them. And meanwhile, the fear is palpable and the airstrikes are continuing. And children report just, a feeling of terror and insecurity.
OK, so these are people moving north from the border. How far are they having to move? Where are these camps that have been set up?
Well, they're mostly schools, and they're not that far away. They are moving out of the immediate, the area closer to the border, 10 kilometers from the border, and moving further north towards Beirut. Schools have been opened throughout the country, but most of the people are housed in schools along the coast there, south of Beirut. And although it's really not that far away, it took hours. Some families slept in their cars, and some people are still sleeping on their cars or outside because there's just not enough space, not enough shelters for people to be safely housed. It's a real chaotic situation and very dangerous and very scary, obviously.
Just looking at the broader context here of Lebanon, it's probably worth reminding people that the country has had to deal with waves of displaced people, probably 3 waves from this week's intensified bombardments, since the October 7th attacks, and from what was going on before that attack.
Sure. I mean, this country has gone through multiple crises and multiple waves of displacement. Of course, the Palestinian refugee question is a quite old one here. And since the Syrian civil war, there was a significant influx of Syrian refugees. Lebanon hosts the largest number of refugees per capita than any other country in the world. And on top of that, there has been a series of crises in the last 5 years with the Beirut port explosion and the economic collapse and the governance fragility. And the country has really just passed through such a complex and complicated and terrible time until the war then escalated in October, further displacing people along the border, and then escalating, of course, this week with the major increase in hostilities on Monday. And this has affected every aspect of a child's life, and for us in particular, the lack of access, the interruption to the educational school year is again a feature of this year of a kid's life. This is the 5th year of extremely interrupted education for kids, and it will take decades for Lebanon and the kids here to recover from that.
Okay, thank you for talking us through that so clearly. Jennifer Moorehead, Country Director for Lebanon at Save the Children. Now, let me take you back to our top story about developments in Lebanon. Johann Wadephul is a defence policy expert and deputy head of the opposition CDU-CSU parliamentary group in Germany's parliament, the Bundestag. Welcome to DW, Mr. Wadephul. What level of alert is Germany on at the moment, given events in Israel and Lebanon?
Of course, on a high alert with 2 reasons. The first one is Germany is a core partner for Israel. You know, the existence and the security of Israel is part of our state reason. That is what Chancellor Merkel said in the Knesset in 2008. And the second reason is, of course, that a lot of refugees from this region, especially from Syria and Iraq, who now live in Lebanon, in the last 10 years came to Germany. And if this conflict goes on, we can expect that more refugees will leave Lebanon and go to Europe. And of course, the last aim of their way will be Germany. So we are really interested to calm down this conflict, and we call on all sides to be open for a ceasefire, for a temporary ceasefire.
Indeed, and Germany was one of the signatories of this American-led call for a 21-day ceasefire. I suppose the question is, given Israel's insistence on doing things its own way, is there any part in the US or indeed Germany calling for a ceasefire when you know full well that the call will be ignored?
No, let me firstly please say that Israel has every right to defend itself, and especially if I focus to the situation in the north. What Hezbollah is doing is against the resolution of the United Nations 1701. Hezbollah has to withdraw from the border and to go back after the Litani River, which they do not do currently.
So the conditions that
Israel
you've just laid out
every right
there, fine. Israel has a right to defend itself. The conditions that you laid out there, as far as that's fine. Let's go back to my question, which was, why call for a ceasefire? Why go to all that effort when you know that your call will be ignored?
I hope that arguments will be heard, especially if they come from very close friends like Germany and like the United States. And Israel should understand that we are supporting Israel with all political means we do have. But Israel should know that they will not be able to militarily solve all these conflicts. We are already in 2 wars. The war in Gaza hasn't ended, And the next one against Hezbollah is to begin. And Israel should know that these conflicts have to be solved politically in negotiations. And for that very reason, the next step against war would close the door for negotiations. So we call on the Israeli government to stop at that very moment now and to be open for negotiations with Hezbollah. Of course, we also need pressure on Hezbollah. We ask Qatar and other countries in the Gulf region, Arabic countries, to put more pressure on Hezbollah. We need more pressure on the Iranian regime. Of course, that is also part of what has to be done. But in this very situation, it would really be a bad development if the Israeli government would decide to begin a ground invasion in these hours.
Thank you so much for joining us. Member of the German Parliament, defence policy expert, Johann Wadephul.
Welcome.